From as early as I can remember, my life was laid out in color-coded folders and carefully plotted future plans. I was the daughter who never made waves, never missed deadlines, and never asked for more than what was offered. My parents called me their little genius, their future scientist, the one who would someday cure diseases or discover new elements. And I believed them. I believed everything they ever told me, especially the promise of the college fund. It started when I was just 7. My mom showed me a folder, thick and crisp with bank statements. Every month, she said, smiling like she was giving me the key to the universe, "We're putting money away for your college, so when you're ready, you can go anywhere you want, Harvard, Yale, anywhere." I took that folder as gospel. I carried it like a shield against the chaos that life sometimes tried to toss my way. It meant my effort mattered. It meant the late nights studying under a flickering desk lamp, the weekends I spent at science fairs instead of parties, the AP classes and debate tournaments. It all meant something. It meant I was going somewhere. Unlike Nathan. Nathan was my younger brother by 3 years and the family's hurricane of charm and unpredictability. Where I was spreadsheets, he was scribbles. Where I was plans, he was whim. He had a way of walking into rooms and making everyone forget they were mad at him. I used to envy that. Not the recklessness, but the ease with which he moved through the world while I fought tooth and nail for every inch. My parents adored him. They laughed at his messes, cleaned up his disasters, and excused his mediocrity with phrases like, "He's just finding his path," or "He's got charisma." And when he wrecked his first car, they replaced it without hesitation. He learned his lesson, Dad said. I had to save 3 years for my used Civic. Still, I didn't hate Nathan. I didn't even resent him, not really. I just quietly adjusted to the unspoken rules of our family dynamic. Nathan got second chances. I got expectations. So I followed the path I believed would make them proud. I graduated top of my class, racked up every academic accolade I could, and set my sights on Yale. Biochemistry. I wanted to study enzymes and how they could be used to change how we treat disease. And I got in. Early decision, full acceptance. I remember the day the email arrived. I screamed so loud our elderly neighbor came over thinking something terrible had happened. My parents took me out to dinner that night. It was the most expensive place in town, and my mom even ordered champagne. She raised her glass and toasted to the girl who made dreams come true. "Yale won't know what hit them," she said, her eyes glassy with pride. That night, my dad sat me down in the den and showed me the folder again. The college fund. "It's over $150,000 now," he told me. "Not quite enough to cover everything, but with scholarships and a job, you'll be fine." I believed him. The summer passed in a blur of shopping trips for dorm supplies, laptop comparisons, and roommate emails. Nathan had decided to take a gap year to figure things out, which mainly consisted of sleeping in and attending casual networking meetups with vague intentions of launching a tech startup. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I had Yale. I had purpose. I had a future. Until I didn't. 2 weeks before I was supposed to move into my dorm, Dad called a family meeting. I thought it was about logistics, what time we'd leave, what route to take to New Haven. But when I walked into the living room, everything felt off. My mom was sitting on the edge of the sofa like she might float away. Dad was standing stiffly by the fireplace. Nathan was on his phone, not even pretending to care. "Put the phone away," Dad snapped. Nathan rolled his eyes and slid it into his pocket. This is serious. Then he looked at me. Mackenzie, honey, there's been a situation with your college fund. My heart froze. I remember saying, "What kind of situation?" Mom's eyes filled with tears. "We lost it," she said, voice cracking. "We lost everything." I couldn't comprehend the words at first. Lost what? The bank made a mistake? It was a misunderstanding? Dad shook his head. It wasn't a mistake. 8 months ago, I invested the fund. It was supposed to double, triple even. A downtown real estate development. Solid track record. But the developer ran off with the money. He spoke like someone explaining the weather. The authorities are investigating, he added, but the money's gone. My mouth went dry. All of it? Every last dollar, Mom whispered. We're so sorry. I sat down, knees buckling under the weight of their words. But Yale, we leave in 2 weeks. We kept hoping something would change, Dad said, that the money would come through or you'd get more aid. You waited 3 weeks to tell me? I asked, voice shaking. You let me buy books, register for classes, plan my entire life, and now you tell me it's gone? There are other options, Mom offered quickly. State school, community college, maybe take a year off, save up. No, I said, standing. I'll figure it out. Don't be foolish, Dad cut in. Taking out $200,000 loans? That's financial suicide. And gambling my college fund on a con artist wasn't, I snapped. Silence. Nathan finally looked up from his lap. It's just school, Mac. Not the end of the world. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I turned, walked to my room, and cried into my pillow all night. Then I woke up and started applying for emergency scholarships, adjusting my loan packages, calling Yale's financial aid office, and rewriting my plan. When I showed my parents how I could still go barely, they didn't even act relieved. They acted annoyed. You're being irrational, Dad said. This will haunt you financially for years. You should be proud, I replied. I learned that from the best. They drove me to Yale in silence. No hugs, no tears, just a quick drop-off. And as I stood alone in my tiny dorm, surrounded by other families laughing and helping their children move in, I realized something brutal and final. I was on my own. But that didn't scare me. It focused me. It lit something in me that no amount of praise or promises ever had. And I swore to myself, as I unfolded my twin XL sheets, that someday they would regret every decision that led me to stand in that room alone. Because I wasn't broken. I was becoming dangerous. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. While my classmates excitedly explored campus, joined clubs, and bonded over dorm pizza nights, I was scrubbing tables at the dining hall by 6 a.m., tutoring chemistry students in the evenings, and logging into my federal loan portal at night to calculate just how much interest I was stacking up by the hour. I barely slept. I rationed my meal plan points like wartime currency. I skipped every social event that cost more than $0, which, at Yale, was basically everything. And yet, I kept going, because in every exhausted breath and every aching muscle was the same thought: they will not break me. My parents had made their choice, and now I was making mine. I thought about them constantly, not because I missed them, but because I didn't know how to stop trying to understand. What kind of people spend a decade building a dream with their daughter, only to hand it to her brother like a leftover dinner roll? What kind of mother cries when her daughter gets into Yale and then signs a check to fund her son's vaporware startup while lying through her teeth about a real estate scam? My rage simmered beneath everything I did, but I didn't let it erupt. Instead, I channeled it into every paper, every experiment, every class discussion. My professors noticed. I became known as the student who always asked one more question, stayed 1 hour longer, found one more flaw in the research. I wasn't just trying to succeed, I was trying to leave them behind so thoroughly they'd need a telescope to see me. My roommate, Sophie, whose dad managed some hedge fund in Manhattan, watched me with fascination. One night, after I turned down her invitation to a formal because I couldn't afford the shoes, she asked, "Why are you always pushing so hard? Like, beyond hard?" I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Because I don't have a safety net. My dad says no one escapes a hole digging with spoons," she said. "You need a lever." I didn't sleep much that night because something about her words lodged into my brain and refused to leave. I didn't have money, but I had something better: resentment, rage, and reason. And I was going to build a lever out of those three things if it killed me. It wasn't long before Professor Wilson noticed me. She was a force, brilliant, dry, and known for her cutthroat expectations. But she also had a sharp sense for raw potential, and I suppose she saw something in me. After class one afternoon, she stopped me. "Mackenzie, are you free for a moment?" My heart lurched. I thought I was in trouble, but instead she said, "I've been watching your lab work. You have an instinct for pattern disruption. I'm leading a new research initiative, and I want you on the team." That moment, standing in her office with a poster of the periodic table behind her and sunlight slanting across her bookshelves, was the first time since Yale began that I felt like someone had really seen me. The project was intense. Enzyme pathways, targeted delivery systems for drug therapies, all experimental, all cutting edge. It came with a small stipend, just $200, but that was enough to let me quit one of my part-time jobs and reclaim a few hours of my sanity. More importantly, it reignited something I hadn't felt in months: curiosity. One late night in the lab, as we reviewed molecular data, I found myself wondering aloud if the same targeted enzyme technology could be adapted for cosmetic uses. Professor Wilson raised an eyebrow. "You mean skin applications?" "Exactly," I said. "What if we could deliver active ingredients in a way that bypasses surface degradation? Skin care is full of waste. Most of it never penetrates where it needs to go." She sat back in her chair and looked at me differently. "That's actually a very commercial idea." From that moment on, we explored it in parallel with the medical research. Nothing formal, just quiet conversations and brainstorming sessions in between our usual work. That's when I began sketching out the idea that would later become precision dermal science. A product, a company, a future I could shape myself. It started as an idea, born from necessity and anger and too many skipped meals. I wanted control. I wanted power. I wanted to show them that the girl they dismissed as just book smart was building something real. I didn't know how I'd do it, but I knew I would. Around this time, I also started digging into what really happened to my college fund. I didn't trust my parents' story, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Nathan's sudden pivot to CEO energy wasn't a coincidence. Over Thanksgiving break, I went home. The house was different, brighter, new furniture, a new SUV in the driveway. Mom had new hair. Dad had a new watch. Nathan's room looked like a tech startup exploded inside it, dual monitors, LED strip lighting, and a whiteboard filled with what he probably thought were billion-dollar ideas. They claimed things were tight financially, but the math didn't add up. Then I overheard them, late at night, whispering in the kitchen. "She doesn't suspect," Mom said. "She's too busy grinding to look up." "Once Digital Apex takes off," Dad replied, "we'll pay her loans tenfold. She'll thank us someday." That was the moment everything crystallized. There had been no real estate scam. They had used my college fund, my future, to fund Nathan's startup. They didn't just lie. They stole. Cold, methodical, calculated theft. And they had convinced themselves it was some kind of noble sacrifice. I went back to Yale and made a vow. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet. First, I would win. First, I would build something so undeniable that when the confrontation came, I'd have proof not just of what they did, but of how wrong they were. That spring, I officially launched the company idea with two classmates, Jordan, an MBA student with a knack for strategy, and Liam, a grad student in chemical engineering with a background in skincare formulation. We spent every free moment working on it. Nights, weekends, holidays. While Nathan was blowing through thousands on marketing consultants and vision boards, we were refining formulas, writing white papers, and learning about venture capital from free podcasts. Our professor connected us to the Yale Entrepreneurship Center. We entered a competition. We pitched. We won. $25,000 in prize money and mentorship from real investors. And suddenly, precision dermal science wasn't a dream. It was a company. I didn't tell my parents, not even when we signed our first licensing deal, not when we closed our seed round, not when we launched our product to glowing reviews in a niche skincare journal. I said nothing. Let them think I was still working in the dining hall. Let them think I was still begging for meal points and crying over midterms. Let them think they were the heroes of this story. Because when I finally told them the truth, it wouldn't be in anger. It would be in power. And that moment when it came would be the most important confrontation of my life. It was just after New Year's when I returned home for winter break. The train ride to Boston was quiet, my thoughts louder than the hum of the tracks beneath me. I watched the landscape blur past in frozen silence, snow curling in drifts against bare trees. My duffel bag was heavier than it had been in September, not with clothes, but with quiet victory. Tucked between layers of fleece and notebooks was a glass bottle, sleek and frosted, with our company's embossed logo shining silver in the light. The first product from Precision Dermal Science. I wasn't sure what I would do with it yet. I didn't need to flaunt it. I didn't even need them to be proud. I just wanted to place it on the table when the time came and say, without anger, but with unmistakable truth, "You were wrong." Dad picked me up in a car I recognized. Not the SUV from earlier that year. The old sedan. When I slid into the passenger seat, the first thing I noticed was the crack across the dashboard and the faint smell of old takeout. "Had to downgrade," he muttered without prompting. "Just trying to be smart with money." I said nothing, but I saw the signs immediately. The house was colder, the lights dimmer, the new furniture still stood, but now it looked out of place, like luxury trapped in a budget. Mom smiled too brightly when I walked through the door, her hug clinging a little longer than usual, as if hoping to pull me back into a narrative I no longer believed. Nathan wasn't home. "Out meeting with investors," Dad said with a shrug. "Big pitch today." His voice held that familiar blend of forced optimism and delusion I had come to recognize in tech bros and desperate parents alike. At dinner, the energy was tight, tense. Mom served roast chicken and kept asking about my classes, pretending to be fascinated by things she hadn't cared about when I needed her most. I answered politely, but offered little. I was no longer interested in performing for their approval. I watched them more than I spoke, noting the way they glanced at each other over forks and folded napkins. Something had shifted, something they weren't saying. When Nathan finally arrived, he looked nothing like the smug boy from last spring. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes were red-rimmed, his voice was hoarse when he mumbled hello. I recognized the look immediately. Failure dressed in denial. "How'd it go?" Dad asked, too quickly. Nathan collapsed into a chair. "Same as the last one," he said, his voice flat. "Interesting concept, but not viable. Not enough differentiation. Not enough user traction." He gave a hollow laugh. "They told me to come back when I actually had something." Mom reached for his hand, her face collapsing with concern. "They don't see your vision, sweetheart." "No," he said, pulling away. "They see it just fine. It just doesn't matter." I sat in silence, watching the cracks spread across the fantasy they'd built. Nathan rubbed his eyes, then looked straight at me. "You know, they used your college fund to bankroll all this, right?" The words dropped like stone into water, sending silence rippling through the room. Dad flinched. "Nathan." "No," he snapped. "She deserves to know, if she doesn't already." He turned back to me. "They didn't lose your fund in some real estate scam. They gave it to me, all of it, because they thought I'd be the better investment." Mom burst into tears. Dad slammed his hand on the table. "That's enough." "Is it?" Nathan stood up. "She should hear it. She should know exactly how much you believed in her." They all turned to me, waiting for my response. I looked at each of them in turn, letting the silence hold, stretch, tighten. "I already knew," I said calmly. "Last Christmas, I overheard you talking in the kitchen. I found the bank statements. I recorded everything." Mom's face went pale. Dad opened his mouth, but I didn't give him the chance. "I know about the startup. I know about the money transfers. I know exactly how much faith you didn't have in me." Nathan sat back down, staring at the floor. "Then why didn't you say anything?" "Because I wanted to show you who you were betting against." I reached into my bag and pulled out the product, the serum. I placed it on the table like a chess piece, final and immovable. "This is the first product from my company," I said. "Precision Dermal Science. We launched last quarter. We've already secured 3 licensing deals. Our valuation just passed $2.1 million. No one spoke. I continued. "We won Yale's innovation competition last spring, raised seed funding, filed a patent, built a team. We're profitable, legitimate, and not 1 cent came from you." Dad stared at the bottle like it might bite him. Mom whispered, "Why didn't you tell us?" "Why would I?" I asked. "You lied to me, watched me drown. You stood there and called it teaching me how to swim." Dad leaned forward, his voice low and desperate. "We thought we were doing the right thing, Mackenzie. Your brother was a gamble," I cut in. "And you placed that bet with someone else's life savings. Mine." "We thought we could make it back," he said. "That we'd pay you back with interest, that you'd understand once you saw the outcome." "Then let me show you the outcome," I said. "You backed a vanity project, I built a business. Mom reached across the table, her eyes shining. "Can we fix this, please? Can we try?" I stared at her hand, then pulled a document from my bag. "This is a repayment plan. 5 years. Fair interest. You don't have to grovel, just sign it." Dad picked up the papers, read silently. When he looked back up, something had changed in his eyes. Resignation, maybe, or shame. He signed. Mom signed. Nathan watched them, then turned to me. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought you agreed to it, that you were okay with it. I didn't know the full story." "You didn't ask," I said. "You didn't want to know." He nodded slowly. "I still messed up, and I'm sorry. But what you've built, it's amazing." I gave him a small nod. "Thanks." That night, I sat alone in my childhood bedroom, the serum bottle on my nightstand like a trophy I never wanted. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired, sad, but also finally free. The next morning, I received an email from Yale. A scholarship had been anonymously donated in my name. Full tuition for the rest of my undergraduate degree, no signature, no note. But I knew. I never asked Nathan to confirm it. He never did. But sometimes, silence is the closest thing to forgiveness. The second semester of sophomore year passed in a blur of whiteboards, late-night lab work, investor meetings, and secret moments of wonder. Precision dermal science was no longer an experiment in resilience. It was a living, breathing organism, one I had helped build cell by cell from the ashes of betrayal. The scientific community had begun to whisper our name. Journal articles cited our research. Cosmetic companies knocked, some with proposals, some with blank checks. But more than money or notoriety, what filled me was the quiet thrill of standing on my own 2 feet, no longer waiting for anyone to catch me or fail to. I didn't visit home for spring break. I told them I was traveling for a research symposium, which wasn't entirely untrue. I was invited to speak at a biotech entrepreneurship panel in New York, where I shared the stage with 2 former unicorn startup founders and a venture capitalist who grilled me hard about market scalability. I held my ground, explained our IP, our growth metrics, and our roadmap to product diversification. Later, that same investor cornered me at the networking reception and said, with a grin, "You're the most dangerous kind of founder. Underestimated and overprepared. We should talk." Back at Yale, Professor Wilson watched me carefully after the event. "You've changed," she said, not unkindly. "You used to approach problems like puzzles. Now you handle them like chess." I smiled. Maybe I've finally learned which pieces not to protect. She didn't ask what I meant, and I didn't elaborate. There was no need. That semester, I worked with Jordan and Liam to develop our first full-scale product line. Our anti-aging serum had become a proof of concept. Now we were expanding into targeted acne treatments and pigmentation correctors. Every new formulation was a fresh chance to prove the technology's range and a deeper lesson in what it meant to build not just a company, but a philosophy of care. In April, we closed a $1.5 million Series A funding round. It was led by a female-founded venture firm that championed underrepresented voices in science. When the deal was signed, they invited us to dinner. The managing partner raised her glass and said, "To women who weren't given permission, just opportunity." I thought of my mother, and how often she'd told me I was brilliant but never powerful. I thought of how often she'd poured her faith into Nathan's future. even when it was stitched together with promises and no prototype. And I thought of how, somehow, her absence in my success story had taught me to fill that space with my own name. Summer arrived like a quiet miracle. Our clinical trials passed FDA review for over-the-counter application. We signed a licensing deal with one of the largest skincare brands in Asia. I moved into a new apartment, one with hardwood floors, real sunlight, and enough space to finally exhale. I bought myself a couch that wasn't hand-me-down, a coffee maker that didn't leak, and a wall print that simply read, "Build what they said you'd never survive." It wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. In July, Nathan called. I hadn't spoken to him in 2 months. His voice was nervous, stripped of the usual bravado. "Hey, Mac," he began, "can I ask you something that's not about money?" I was intrigued. "Sure." He hesitated, then said, "How did you do it? How did you get people to believe in you, even after everything?" I sat with the question. Then I said, "I didn't wait for them to believe. I showed them what they were missing." He was quiet a long time. "I got a job," he said finally. "Entry-level UI design at a startup. It's not flashy, but it's honest." I told him I was proud of him, and I meant it. In September, during junior year, we launched our own direct-to-consumer line. The campaign was clean, elegant, and quietly radical. Instead of celebrity endorsements or Photoshop-perfect models, we featured real women scientists, students, mothers whose skin told stories of survival and self-care. The reviews were glowing. Pre-orders exceeded projections. Influencers took notice, not because we paid them, but because they believed in the mission. We sold out within a week. More than product, we had built trust. Meanwhile, my parents continued to make monthly payments toward my college fund. True to my word, I didn't go public with their betrayal. I didn't need to. Success had done what confrontation never could. It had redrawn the map. Now, they called occasionally, careful and cordial, always trying to read whether I was still angry. I wasn't. Not in the way they feared. I no longer needed their apology. I no longer carried the debt of their disappointment. I had outgrown it. By December, we were approached by a global conglomerate interested in acquiring our technology. They offered us a valuation that would have stunned even the most optimistic version of myself a year ago. I flew to San Francisco for the meeting. The boardroom was all glass and leather and cold espresso. They tried to lowball us at first, as they always do, but I had learned to negotiate like a founder who knew her worth. I walked out with a revised term sheet and a timeline that put the acquisition within 6 months. Back at Yale, I walked through the quad with Liam and Jordan, the early snow crunching beneath our boots. "Can you believe it?" Jordan said. 2 years ago, we were pitching to undergrads with free pizza." I looked up at the bare trees, their branches like veins against the sky. "I can believe it," I said, "because we never stopped moving, even when the ground disappeared." Liam grinned. "You were the ground, Mac. You held all of us together." That night, I lay in bed and thought about that first semester, about the second-hand textbooks, the skipped meals, the part-time jobs I balanced like glass plates. I thought about the moment I overheard my parents congratulating Nathan on using my fund for his dream. The way the floor seemed to vanish beneath me, the betrayal that had nearly broken me. And then I thought of the lab, the patent filing, the competition, the first licensing deal, the way I had stitched myself back together using nothing but grit, and the quiet defiance of showing up every day when no one expected me to. And I smiled, Because the best revenge isn't loud. It's consistent. It's dignified. It's arriving at the destination everyone told you was out of reach and realizing you built your own map to get there.